I wanted to introduce Lloyd's Register and this title, A 21st Century Model for Doing Social Business. This was a title that we came up with. Obviously, it's for you to judge whether you think that's true. But in case you're thinking that we're a highly avant-garde organization, I'd have to say that it took us 12 years beyond the year 2000 to perhaps get to that state. You could argue that previously our governance probably more resembled a 19th century organization. For those of you who were here yesterday and you heard about our archive and our heritage, where we've kept the minutes from General Committee going back to the 19th century, those committees only stopped working in 2012. And so we've been through quite a transformation. But I thought one thing I'd do is perhaps just talk a little bit about Lloyd's Register. I've seen today a speaker mention Lloyd's of London. They actually got it right, that Lloyd's Register and Lloyd's of London are not the same thing. They probably started off in the same coffee house, along with, so we had Lloyd's of London, which was insurers. We had Lloyd's List, which was a journal which recorded vessel movements and obviously casualties, which was what most of the insurers were looking for. Lloyd's Bank came out of much the same sort of beginnings, and Lloyd's Register. And Lloyd's Register came a little bit later than the insurance industry. At that time, as you can probably imagine, all Britain's international trade, and it was trading increasingly overseas, was carried by ship. And often the cargo wasn't getting to its destination or wasn't arriving in the UK. There was a huge number of casualties. And therefore, the insurers wanted to find a way of managing risk and assessing risk. And they came up with a register. And effectively, what the register did was to certify a ship and its crew on two counts. One, whether the ship was okay, and two, whether the crew were capable of sailing the ship. And the first was letters A to E, A being good, E not being good, and 1 to 5, 1 being good for the crew, and 5 probably incompetent. And so therefore, if you were offered a ship that was rated at E5, you'd probably walk away. If you were offered a ship that was A1, then you would probably agree to put your cargo on it and it would be insured. And that's really where the term A1 came from, and we still use it in the notification today. That situation continued for most of the 19th century. In the 20th century, as Britain industrialized, we were having more problems with more things apart from just ships. One of our competitors, TÜV, and you see their logos on car windows and all sorts of things, was set up in Germany in the late 1800s as a result of boiler explosions causing a huge number of fatalities. Again, there, the technology had moved on. The assurance around the technology wasn't there. Moving into the 20th century, LR stayed with its marine roots, and I've got marine roots, so I don't have a problem talking about it, but it moved more into other infrastructure. It was very much involved in the beginning of the nuclear industry in the UK in the 1950s, the petrochemical industry from the 1920s. And so today, LR has, in its business, has got quite a portfolio. It even got into management assurance when that became something that people did in the 1970s and 1980s. So the marine business, the energy business, and the management assurance, management systems business are really the three legs. I arrived in 2009. At that time, there was Lloyd's Register, and there was a Lloyd's Register Educational Trust, the legacy of which I think we still see in the room. Some of the grants have carried on through into the foundation. At the time, there was a fairly high degree of separation, and most people in Lloyd's Register business didn't really know very much about what the Educational Trust was doing. But at the same time, the people in Lloyd's Register thought that we were working for a charity, although some of us did. And therefore, we used to have these sort of ethical dilemmas of whether we bothered charging our customers or not. Because obviously, if we're charitable, then maybe we shouldn't charge them. But if we were a business, we should. And as I wrote in my first 100 days missive to my CEO at the time, I said, it must be a bit like what it's like at the BBC, where you can't decide whether you're working for Top Gear or Songs of Praise, where you can't decide whether, in fact, you're a cog in a highly commercial organization or you're providing a public service. And I think this was recognized in Lloyd's, which is why in 2012, they moved towards the separation of the group and the foundation. The foundation now is far more active than the Educational Trust was, and certainly as a key player at Lloyd's Register commercial business, I'm really pleased to see this. And I found today and yesterday both very refreshing, because obviously as the wealth generators in the business, it's great to see what's happening to that money and how we're helping the world. So if I move a little bit on, working together for a safer world is the strapline of the business. But actually, if we think about the business, and I must admit this was somewhat inspired by the presentation yesterday when I Ching was mentioned and the concept of yin and yang. And I think my best way of sort of explaining to you the relationship between the group and the foundation is a bit yin and a bit yang. But what you're all thinking to yourself is, well, which is which? Because as you probably know, this duality is symbolized by contrasts. The yin is dark, shady, and probably literally a bit of a wet blanket. And I think for most of us in the group, that's probably how we regard the foundation, or possibly would have done in the past. Whereas we were yang, we were the bright and prosperous people in the business. I have to say, fortunes have changed in the last 2 years. In the group, we're pretty miserable, and the foundation is now very bright and prosperous. But that's the benefit of being in an organization with this duality. So in terms of, so we have the logo, and also I decided to sort of cannibalize our strapline and use it because actually we are working together with the foundation for a safer world. And that motivates a lot of us. If we look at that duality in practice, the commercial business delivers engineering and technical assurance to clients all over the world. We're a very global organization. We have a huge footprint in a lot of the industrialized world. And then the charitable side clearly provides grants and undertakings. And that's what we've been seeing in the last 2 days, which has been so, I think, so affirming for a lot of us, is it's good to actually finally see in a concentrated session where effectively the fruits of the labor of the 7,500 people in the group are going. Not only that, but we calculated as scientists that 67, I think it was 66.667 recurring percentage of our commercial activities supported the charitable aims. A lot of what we do is about safety. LR started precisely because people felt that the maritime system was unsafe, and by going through this classification process, it's become more safe. And certainly, over a period of time, we've certainly seen the maritime world get safer and safer. And for those of you that would say, well, what about the Korean ferry disaster? Unfortunately, our jurisdiction does not go beyond that which is regulated by IMO, which is international shipping. And domestic shipping, we're getting increasingly involved with because local and national governments are now realizing that they're incapable of properly regulating their own coastal business. That number is probably more than 67%, but I think it's to make the point that actually the group and the foundation have very much the same aims and objectives in mind. So in terms of some of the practical examples, we have now a much more active technology focus. We've set up group technology centres in Singapore and Southampton. We've appointed a chief technology officer, Neil McCullum, who is on the board of the Turing Institute, just to demonstrate how the group and the foundation are working so closely together. We do quite a lot of R&D, and we need to make sure that we synchronize our R&D with the work of the foundation. We don't duplicate each other. And if necessary, we perhaps suggest to the foundation that they may like to look at some of the things that we would like to do. Our management systems business fundamentally issues ISO certificates. As individuals, you probably don't need them, but if you're in a business having 9,000, 14,000, 18,000, are the sort of certificates that you need if you want to trade with large organizations. Those certificates now proliferate. There are any number of them, and it now goes into such things as climate change, environmental controls, supply chain security. So the management systems business is very active, and there we don't just serve the marine and energy business, we serve any business that wants that certificate. In the marine business, the Lloyd Register Classification, Marine Classification Group, they certify about a fifth of the world fleet, everything from mega yachts to the new aircraft carriers being delivered from Rosyth for the British Navy. right up to supertankers. So any kind of vessel. Someone asked me the other day whether we classed Philip Green's yacht, the Lionheart. And I was saying, well, just as we're the acceptable face of capitalism in our 21st century business model, maybe Philip Green is the bit that's having more difficulty with the current regime. In energy, we get heavily involved in offshore installations, some of which you heard about earlier today. Very heavily involved both in shallow and in deep water. We're involved in offshore renewable, both wind and now wave, but also heavily involved in land-based energy, including the current generation of nuclear power around the world, petrochemicals and various others. So a very sort of wide spectrum activity. So in terms of the income to the foundation's been going for 3 years. Richard came out of the group, went to the foundation. One or two others from the group have gone to the foundation, but also they've had people like Ruth who have been a real joy to work with since I started doing external affairs. And in my role as external affairs, sometimes I can't decide whether I'm representing the group or the foundation. And often when I'm talking to governments, it's best to forget which I'm representing, because if we want to do business with governments, the fact that we're owned by a foundation is actually a very powerful tool for us. So, clearly the business can benefit from those connections and those links. And that's not just with the UK government, that's with governments all over the world. Particularly when they want to outsource what they're doing, they're particularly interested in the nature of the companies that they're giving their business to. So that foundation group link is very powerful. In my new role, I'm spending a lot of time with the foundation trying to figure out how we maximize the benefit of working together. So the income to the foundation that time has been £60 million. And over these last 2 days, I think you've heard quite a little bit about where that money is going and how it's being spent. Some of it came from our retained earnings and some of it from the investments that were handed to the foundation when it was set up in 2013. So I think really just to conclude, and I'm trying to get you home as soon as possible after the original finishing time. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to you. It's the first time, I think, a lot of people in the group, and there are quite a few people from the group here, who've actually had the opportunity to meet a lot of the people who the foundation has been working with. And it's great for us to be seen as the foundation and the group working together as 1LR. As I said to you, it's a great benefit to have the work of the foundation in my mind when I'm trying to promote LR around the globe. So my view is we use our yin and our yang, and I'm sure Richard will forgive me for describing him as I did earlier. It wasn't personal, it was more perhaps in history. But in the current situation, and I will reference the current situation, the energy industry is probably in a 30-year low economically as a result of the oil price crash in the last quarter of 2014. And the marine business is probably going through a 30-year low as well as a result of a super cycle, which then had a second super cycle, and there are far too many ships in the world. And as a result, the shipbuilding industry in Asia is in a fairly advanced state of crisis. So 2 of our sort of 3 businesses are sort of finding it a bit tough at the moment. But the great thing also about the way we are is effectively by owning ourselves, we can right-size ourselves and figure out how we're going to get through it. And we will. And, as we always say, out of these difficulties come all sorts of new opportunities, and we are getting lots of new opportunities in such areas as working with global navies who traditionally haven't bothered with classification, but are now realizing they probably should. So it's great to be meeting you. I regard you all as part of a sort of an extended LR family, and we really care about the work that you do, and I've been very interested to learn about it. And this is all being videoed, and I'm hoping that we will be able to take excerpts of this and show this to our 7,500 staff around the globe so they can see as well. So please support us and spread the good word about LR, and thanks very much. Thank you.